The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers is a difficult game to talk about in the modern age, let alone review, because its true potential isn't what it is or what it was, but what it would become. And as a wise king once said, deeds will not be less valiant because they are unpraised. And I'm sure that sounds super pretentious coming from a schmuck like me. Hey everyone, it's Spammer D, and look, I'm just gonna cut to the chase. The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers feels like a beta, feels like a blueprint, a testing of ideas, all for the return of the king. And while one could argue that that's how it's supposed to be with any game or movie or story in general, the first story sets up the foundation for the next, The Two Towers really emphasizes the whole beta idea with the game's ending, promoting the launch of the next title. Very EA move, don't you think? But I'm getting ahead of myself. After all, the best place to start any story is usually the beginning, and The Two Towers agrees, despite it being the middle of the trilogy. Released for the Xbox, Gamecube, and PS2, the version I'm playing, in 2002 and 2003, Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers covers far more than its name would suggest, and it does so with grandioso style, opening up with actual DVD quality video and audio straight from the first movie, The Fellowship of the Ring. And what better way to start than with a great war that set the stage for the entirety of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And in a great touch, the movie footage seamlessly, for PS2, transitions into the in-game cutscenes and straight into the action, turning arguably the most important battle in the entire series into a tutorial. Nice. But they only go over the basics here. Fast attacks, blocking, heavy attacks for breaking shields, technically everything you need to know to get started. After smacking down hordes of orcs, we really start to dive into the game. Though again, despite being a license-based game, one based on the movie, the second movie, that's not where our Fellowship's journey actually begins. In this version, the events of both Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers are actually being narrated to us by Aragorn. And not just some stand-in either. Viggo Mortensen? God, I hope I'm getting that right. As well as most of the Lord of the Rings cast actually reprise their roles for this game, reshooting classic lines as well as adding in new ones, which is just awesome, and definitely something you don't see very often, even today.
It was here that we would find far more than the tomb of Balin, Lord of Moria.
We have barred the gates, drums in the deep. We cannot get out. They are coming.
In fact, this game was pretty much made alongside the second movie, utilizing the actors, sets, props, and all that good stuff to really capture the look and feel of the movies despite its era's limitations, making it arguably one of, if not the most faithful, license-based game. You know, that type of game that's often frowned upon. And in a cool feature for you movie buffs out there, as you progress through the game, you can actually unlock DVD-style features, including concept art, making of the game segments, and actor interviews. Pretty sweet. And again, something we don't usually see in games anymore. Gee, I wonder why video isn't used as a reward anymore. Still though, despite all the references and assets available, the limitations are still present, and certainly more apparent when compared to The Return of the King, which was only released a year later. Again, it may seem unfair to compare the two, but Two Towers definitely feels less detailed overall. The stages just feel more scarce, and the character models definitely could have used a bit more love. Gimli? Oh god, look at how they massacred my boy! Hagrid, do you see this? Though I still gotta give the game some major kudos for its use of the narration, as it is a clever way of being able to go back to before the second movie to cover some of the more memorable action scenes of the first one, as they never actually made a game based on it. And hold up. I know what you're about to say. What about the Fellowship of the Ring? No, that was made by another company entirely, and is actually based on the novels, not the movie adaptations. Though I can see why you'd think that. I know I did when I bought it. Anyway, the first real fight featuring our heroes is actually a pseudo-boss fight against the Nazgul, or ring race of all enemies, as you try to protect Frodo as Aragorn. And despite the fact that there are supposed to be multiple attacking at once, you're in luck, as they only feel like attacking one at a time. At least until the end. Which, thank God, since it gives you a little more practice before the larger swarms of enemies start approaching. Though unfortunately, in a small misstep early on, they don't actually explain to you how to actually kill these guys. Which is by using the heavy attack by the fire to light the torch, and then smacking them with it. Fire. This fight also introduces you to one of the game's other more problematic features. Protecting objectives, in this case Frodo, but we'll come back to that in a bit, as we'll be seeing quite a lot more of it. Once we've won, and after some more movie footage and narration, which is how all the levels start and finish, we're finally introduced to the level select screen, and arguably the first real stage of the game, as well as the character select. From this point forward, you'll be able to play through each stage as either Legolas, the speedy character, Gimli, the power character, or Aragorn, the middle ground between them. Though you'll probably just want to stick to one of them for your first playthrough, otherwise you're going to be playing each stage 3 times. Primarily thanks to one of the game's best mechanics, its level up system. Now, I know you've played games with leveling before, but Lord of the Rings really gets it right, as it's really incorporated into how you choose to fight. The Two Towers is a pretty basic hack and slash adventure game at its core. While you're only introduced to speed attacks, heavy attacks, and blocks at the start, there's actually a lot more, like backsteps, pushing enemies, ranged attacks, and my personal favorite, finishing off foes when they're down. Oh, that is so satisfying. And as you level up, you unlock parries and combo attacks for more damage and, more importantly, score multipliers. And this is where I mean the leveling is incorporated into the fights. Every enemy you kill is ranked from fair to good all the way up to perfect, which obviously grants the most points. In order to reach higher scores, you have to raise the meter down at the bottom left, which you do by avoiding taking hits and pulling off combos. The higher the score you get, the more experience you earn, and the more you can unlock between stages. So playing better can actually be pretty rewarding, especially since each character can only play each stage once. That is, until you've beaten the game at least. So you really want to rack up as much as you can while you can. Because the game isn't exactly easy, and probably not for the best reasons. The combat in Lord of the Rings really does walk that fine line between pretty fun and early 3D jank. Where the game really stands tall is easily in the scope of the fights. Battles where hordes of foes come pouring out as you just cut through all of them feels epic. All punctuated by that amazing music. Yes, just as you would expect, as the game has the movie footage and actors, it's got the music. The award-winning music. The music that's probably gonna get this video flagged. But you know what, that's fine, because as you're hacking and slashing and that orchestra starts revving up in the background, man, that's when the game peaks. Though of course, with every peak, there's a valley, and Two Towers has quite a few. Fights break out across a lot of iconic areas in the Lord of the Rings universe, including areas like the Ancient Forest and the Rohan villages, places that weren't really explored much in the movies, which is definitely cool. But they're also very linear, and you don't have control of the camera. So any real exploration is definitely out. But more problematically, the game just loves having enemies pop up out of nowhere to cheap shot you. A lot. And despite all the different moves and attacks at your disposal, combat is still pretty simple, with a big part of that being thanks to very basic AI. Pretty much every different type of enemy only does the same 2 moves, which may seem like a recipe for an easy win, but it's not, as many can't be knocked out of their attack frames, so if you don't block in time, expect to take a hit. Not helped by the slightly stiff controls. And while wiping out hordes of enemies does feel great, they are still swarming you, so pulling off combos for higher scores actually becomes a lot more frustrating than it should be. Not helped by shielded foes completely limiting your arsenal, lots of invincibility frames, and the fact that a lot of the foes just have a much longer reach than you. Odds are that unless you really feel like mastering this game, most fights are probably just going to devolve into standard button mashing-a-thons, which can get pretty repetitive. Especially since you're playing alone, as co-op wasn't added in until Return of the King, which actually becomes way more noticeable when the objectives come into play, and you get to see just how useless your AI companions can actually be. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of the game has additional challenges requiring you to save or protect different characters or objectives. Prevent the door from being destroyed, save your ally, protect the townspeople, etc, etc, etc. While breaking up the combat with objectives sounds cool and all it really does is just add time limits to the standard fighting, which does not make them any more fun. Like, seriously, the final stage, which should be one of the most epic battles ever, is just ruined by constant protect this, protect that BS. Man, just let me fight. Also, boss fights kinda suck. Just thought I'd throw that in there. So the combat overall is a bit of a mixed bag. There's lots of epic fights, but they're all interlaced with lots of frustrating moments and objectives that make them feel more cheap and tedious than they need to be. Fortunately though, like I said at the beginning, all of this comes off as one big test run, a giant beta, as most of the problems would be ironed out by the time Return of the King would be released, making Two Towers an important stepping stone for that game, and worthy of praise for it. But it also kind of leaves it in an odd predicament, because there's really little reason to play this game over Return of the King. I mean, sure, the music, voiceovers, and story are all epic, but that's all directly thanks to the movie, which you could just watch instead, defeating the need to play through this one, and just letting you skip right to the good stuff. So I'll leave it at this. Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers is still a solid action game that has aged well enough to have a good time. The presentation from the movie is fantastic, and the combat certainly has its moments. If you are a huge Lord of the Rings fan, then it's definitely worth checking out. For everyone else though, I'd actually just recommend skipping this one and jumping straight into Return of the King, and let the movies fill in the gaps for you. Because once you've seen how Return of the King has improved on basically everything, it's hard to go back to The Two Towers.